What if I told you some Corvettes were so bad, even die-hard fans pretend they never existed? America's sports car has some serious skeletons in its closet. Not every model was a winner. Some were genuinely despised. The Corvette, America's sports car. The one name that's been making hearts race and wallets empty since Dwight Eisenhower was in the White House. For nearly 70 years, this car has represented everything we love about American performance. Speed, style. That unmistakable rumble that turns heads at every stoplight. But here's the thing nobody likes to talk about. Not every Corvette was a masterpiece, not even close. Since 1953, Chevrolet has produced over 1.8 million Corvettes. That's a staggering number. And hidden among the legends, the icons, the cars that made grown men weep with joy, are models that made enthusiasts cringe, critics laugh, and dealers absolutely desperate to move them off the lot. We're talking about Corvettes so disappointing that owners still argue about them at car shows. Corvettes that automotive journalists couldn't wait to tear apart. Corvettes that somehow managed to betray everything the nameplate stood for. So what exactly makes a Corvette hated? Well, it depends on who you ask. And trust me, Corvette people have opinions, strong ones. For some, it's about performance. When you slap that crossed flags badge on a hood, you're making a promise of power, a promise of speed. And when a Corvette fails to deliver on that promise, when it gets embarrassed by lesser cars, when it feels sluggish and uninspired, that's a betrayal, that's unforgivable. For others, it's about styling. The Corvette has always been a head-turner, a car that makes people stop and stare. But some years, the designers got it wrong. Really wrong. We're talking about proportions that just didn't work, details that aged like milk, and styling choices that seemed questionable the moment they rolled off the assembly line. Then there's reliability. Nothing kills enthusiasm faster than a sports car that spends more time in the shop than on the road. Electrical gremlins, mechanical failures, build quality that made you wonder if anyone at the factory actually cared. And sometimes it's just bad timing. A Corvette that arrived during an emissions crisis. A redesign that landed when the economy tanked. Wrong car, wrong moment, wrong everything. Today we're counting down the 10 most hated Corvettes ever made. These are the models that divided the community, disappointed the faithful, and left a complicated legacy. Now, before we dive in, I want to know which Corvette you think will claim the #1 spot. Drop your guess in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe if you haven't already. Let's start our countdown with a model that disappointed during one of the most crucial eras in Corvette history. Number 10. The 1975 Corvette. Picture this. It's 1975, and you've just saved up enough money to buy your dream car, a Corvette. The same nameplate that dominated racetracks and turned heads for over 2 decades. You walk into the dealership, sign the papers, and drive off the lot expecting to feel that legendary American muscle. Instead, you get something that struggles to keep up with your neighbor's station wagon. Welcome to the malaise era, folks. The 1975 Corvette marked one of the darkest chapters in this legendary car's history. This was the year Chevrolet officially killed the big block engine option. Gone, finished. No more 454 cubic inch monsters under the hood. What replaced it? A small block that had been strangled within an inch of its life by emissions equipment. If you lived in California, and let's be honest, a lot of Corvette buyers did, you got the base engine producing a whopping 165 horsepower. Let that sink in for a moment. 165 horsepower in America's sports car. That's less than a modern Toyota Camry makes today. A family sedan. Your grandmother's grocery getter could probably take this Corvette in a drag race. The 0 to 60 times told the whole sad story. Owners reported acceleration times approaching 10 seconds, in a Corvette. There were pickup trucks that could beat that. The car that once terrorized drag strips and made European sports car owners nervous was now getting embarrassed at traffic lights by Oldsmobile sedans. The catalytic converters, the air pumps, the exhaust gas recirculation systems, all that smog equipment turned what should have been a screaming V8 into something that wheezed and coughed its way down the road. And here's the really insulting part. Chevrolet still charged premium prices. They still marketed it as a performance machine. The advertisements showed sleek Corvettes hugging mountain curves, promising excitement and adventure. What they didn't show was the driver getting passed by a Volkswagen Beetle on the highway. Enthusiasts felt genuinely betrayed. They'd grown up watching Corvettes dominate, and now they were being asked to pay top dollar for a car that couldn't get out of its own way. Number 9. The 1980 Corvette. Now you might think things got better by 1980. 5 years of engineering improvements, right? Surely Chevrolet figured out how to make a decent Corvette again. Oh, how wrong you'd be. The 1980 model might actually be worse. This was the year Chevrolet committed what many consider an unforgivable sin. They put a 305 cubic inch engine in the Corvette, not the 350 that Corvette owners expected, a 305. The same engine you could get in a Chevy Malibu. The numbers were absolutely pathetic. 180 horsepower. That's what you got for your money in 1980. And speaking of money, the price had climbed dramatically. You were now paying significantly more than you would have in '75 and getting even less performance for your dollar. It was like Chevrolet was actively trying to insult their customer base. The 305 was so universally despised that Chevrolet quietly dropped it after just one model year. They knew they'd made a mistake. Everyone knew. Car magazines at the time were brutal in their assessments. Road tests read more like obituaries than reviews. Writers who had once praised the Corvette's raw American power now struggled to find anything positive to say. Some suggested the car should come with a paper bag to put over your head at stoplights. The malaise-era Corvettes represented something painful for American automotive enthusiasts. These weren't just slow cars. They were symbols of an industry in crisis, struggling to meet new regulations while desperately trying to maintain some connection to their performance heritage. They failed on both counts. The emissions equipment made the cars unreliable and complicated, while the performance was simply embarrassing. Have you ever actually driven a malaise-era Corvette? If you have, you know exactly what we're talking about. That moment when you floor the accelerator and, wait for it, keep waiting. There it is, a gentle surge that feels more like a suggestion than actual acceleration. The experience absolutely lived down to the reputation. But here's the thing about the 75 and 80 Corvettes. At least their failures made sense in context. Emissions regulations were new, technology hadn't caught up yet, and every manufacturer was struggling. The next Corvette on our list failed for entirely different reasons, ones that had nothing to do with government mandates, and everything to do with questionable decisions made right there in Detroit. Number 8. The 1958 Corvette. You know that feeling when someone you love gets a makeover and comes back looking like they raided a costume jewelry store? That's exactly what happened to the Corvette in 1958, and honestly, it still stings to talk about. See, the 1956 and 57 Corvettes were gorgeous, clean lines, elegant curves. They had this understated beauty that made people stop and stare. Then Chevrolet's design team apparently decided that what America's sports car really needed was more. More chrome, more trim, more everything. And boy, did they deliver. The 1958 Corvette gained nearly 200 pounds of chrome trim. 200 pounds. That's like strapping an adult human being made entirely of shiny metal onto your sports car. They added fake hood louvers that served absolutely no functional purpose. They slapped on a busy grille that automotive journalists at the time called excessive and overdone. And those quad headlights? They divided the enthusiast community right down the middle. Now here's the thing, the late 50s were peak chrome era in American automotive design. Everything was getting shinier, and more elaborate. But the Corvette had always been different. It was supposed to be America's answer to European sports cars, which favored clean, purposeful design over flashy ornamentation. The 58 threw all of that out the window. Contemporary reviews were brutal. One magazine described it as looking like it had been attacked by a chrome plating machine gone haywire. Enthusiasts who had fallen in love with the subtle elegance of previous years felt betrayed. This wasn't evolution. This was regression. The Corvette had gone from sophisticated to gaudy in a single model year. What makes this even more frustrating is that mechanically, the 58 was actually improved. It had better handling, more power options, and genuine performance upgrades. But all anyone could talk about was that overwhelming chrome. The styling was so controversial that Chevrolet started dialing it back almost immediately. By 1961, they had stripped away most of the excess and returned to cleaner aesthetics, but the 58 remains a cautionary tale about what happens when designers lose sight of what made something special in the first place. Number 7. The 2005 through 2007 C6 base models. Fast forward nearly 5 decades, and Chevrolet made almost the opposite mistake. Instead of changing too much, they barely changed anything at all. When the C6 Corvette debuted for the 2005 model year, anticipation was through the roof. The C5 had been around since 1997. 8 years is a long time between generations. Enthusiasts were expecting something dramatic, something that would make their jaws drop. What they got was, well, it looked like someone had given the C5 a mild facelift and called it a day. The forums exploded with complaints. Post after post expressed disappointment that Chevrolet had simply massaged the C5 rather than delivering the dramatic redesign buyers expected. The proportions were nearly identical. The overall shape was familiar to the point of being indistinguishable at a glance. Critics called it a warmed-over C5, and honestly, they weren't entirely wrong. Now, to be fair, there were differences. The headlights were exposed rather than hidden. The taillights were redesigned. The interior got meaningful upgrades, and under the skin, the C6 was genuinely improved with better structural rigidity and refined suspension geometry. But here's the problem with sports cars. They're emotional purchases. People buy them because they want to feel something. And when your brand new Corvette looks almost exactly like the one your neighbor has been driving for years, that emotional impact just isn't there. The base C6 models suffered the most from this perception. The Z06 that came later looked more aggressive and distinctive. But those initial base models, they felt like Chevrolet had played it too safe. The company that had always pushed boundaries with Corvette design had suddenly become conservative. It's fascinating when you think about it. The 58 was hated for changing too much. The early C6 was criticized for not changing enough. Both represent moments when Corvette lost its design direction, just in completely opposite ways. So here's a question for you. When it comes to Corvette generations, do you prefer dramatic redesigns that take risks, or subtle evolution that refines what already works? Drop your thoughts in the comments because this debate has been raging in the Corvette community for decades. These styling controversies definitely got people talking, but at least a questionable design choice doesn't leave you stranded on the side of the road. Unfortunately, the Corvettes coming up next had problems that went way deeper than chrome trim or familiar silhouettes. We're about to look at cars that had serious mechanical and quality issues that made owners question everything. Number 6. The 1984 Corvette. Have you ever been so excited about something that you rushed to be first in line, only to realize that being first was actually the worst possible decision you could have made? Well, that's exactly what happened to thousands of eager buyers who couldn't wait to get their hands on the all-new 1984 Corvette. The C4 generation was supposed to be revolutionary. It was supposed to change everything. And technically, it did change everything. just not in the way anyone hoped. Here's the thing about the 1984 Corvette. It wasn't even supposed to exist. The car was originally planned as a 1983 model, but Chevrolet ran into so many production problems that they had to delay the entire launch by almost a full year. And when I say problems, I mean problems. The new Bowling Green assembly plant was struggling to get up to speed. Quality control was basically a suggestion rather than a requirement, and the revolutionary new chassis and body were causing headaches at every stage of production. So Chevrolet made the decision to skip 1983 entirely. Only 44 pilot cars were built that year, and none of them were ever sold to the public. When the 1984 models finally started rolling off the line, buyers discovered that maybe Chevrolet should have waited even longer. The crossfire injection system was an absolute disaster. This was supposed to be cutting-edge fuel injection technology, but in reality, it was underpowered, unreliable, and nearly impossible for dealers to tune properly. The engine produced only 205 horsepower, and which was actually less than some of the carbureted engines from previous years. Imagine paying top dollar for the newest, most advanced Corvette ever made, and then getting smoked by a 5-year-old model at a stoplight. But the engine was just the beginning. Early buyers reported body panels that didn't line up properly, weather stripping that leaked water into the cabin, and interior pieces that rattled loose within weeks of ownership. Some cars arrived at dealerships with paint defects, others had electrical gremlins that no one could diagnose. The fit and finish was so inconsistent that buying an '84 Corvette was basically a lottery. You might get a decent one, or you might get a rolling quality control nightmare. Number 5. The 1997 to early 1998 C5. You'd think Chevrolet would have learned their lesson after the '84 debacle. You'd think that 13 years later, they'd know better than to rush a new generation Corvette to market before it was ready. You would be wrong. The C5 Corvette launched in 1997 with all the fanfare you'd expect. New chassis, new engine, new everything. And once again, early adopters paid the price for Chevrolet's enthusiasm. The list of problems with first-year C5s reads like a horror novel for car enthusiasts. The active handling system, which was supposed to be this amazing technological advancement, had a nasty habit of randomly activating when you didn't want it to. Imagine cruising down the highway and suddenly your car decides it needs to intervene because of a problem that doesn't actually exist. The electrical issues were legendary. Dashboard displays would fail within months. Door handles, particularly on the driver's side, would snap off in cold weather. The headlight motors would burn out, leaving owners with one eye open and one eye closed. And the column lock system? Don't even get me started. This anti-theft feature would sometimes decide that you, the actual owner with the actual key, were trying to steal your own car. Early C5 owners became regulars at their local dealerships, and not because they wanted to show off their new rides. Forum posts from this era are filled with frustrated owners comparing notes on which problems they'd experienced and which fixes actually worked. Some owners reported going through multiple door handles in a single winter. Others had their active handling systems replaced 3 or 4 times before anyone figured out what was actually wrong. The really frustrating part is that the C5 was genuinely a great car underneath all the first-year bugs. Once Chevrolet sorted out the issues by late 1998 and into 1999, it became one of the best Corvettes ever made. But those early adopters? They paid full price to be beta testers. So let me ask you something. Have you ever been burned by buying a first-year model of any vehicle? Because Corvette buyers learned this lesson the hard way, twice. Speaking of disappointing Corvettes, at least these cars had problems that could eventually be fixed. Coming up next, we're looking at Corvettes that committed the ultimate sin of just being boring. Number 4. the 1972 through 1974 Corvettes. You know what's worse than a bad car? A car that used to be great and then slowly, painfully, became a shadow of itself. That's exactly what happened to the Corvette in the early 70s, and honestly, it's kind of heartbreaking to watch. Let's set the scene. It's 1970, and the C3 Corvette is still a legitimate performance machine. The LT1 engine is pumping out 330 horsepower. The car looks aggressive, dangerous even, with those beautiful chrome bumpers catching the sunlight. Corvette owners are living their best lives. But then something happened. Actually, a lot of things happened, and none of them were good. First came the insurance companies, jacking up rates on anything with serious horsepower. Then the government stepped in with emissions regulations that strangled engines like a python squeezing its prey. And finally, the safety regulators decided that chrome bumpers were basically weapons designed to hurt pedestrians. The Corvette was about to get neutered, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. 1971 saw the first major blow. Compression ratios dropped because now engines had to run on unleaded fuel. Horsepower numbers started falling like autumn leaves. But the real visual tragedy came in 1973 when Chevrolet replaced that gorgeous chrome front bumper with a body-colored urethane unit. Now, to be fair, the 73 front bumper actually looked pretty good. It was integrated nicely into the design, but everyone knew what was coming. 1974 delivered the knockout punch. The rear bumper went rubber too, and suddenly the aggressive C3 looked like it was wearing protective padding, like someone had wrapped the car in bubble wrap for its own safety. The sleek, predatory stance was gone, replaced by something that looked almost apologetic. "Sorry for existing," the car seemed to say. "Please don't hurt me." But the exterior changes were just cosmetic. The real crime was happening under the hood. By 1975, the base Corvette engine produced a pathetic 165 horsepower. 165 from a Corvette. That's less than a modern Honda Accord. The car that had terrorized drag strips and dominated racetracks was now being outrun by family sedans. It was embarrassing, it was sad, and Corvette enthusiasts have never forgotten it. The early 70s Corvettes represent a dark chapter that the brand would rather forget. Can you name a more forgettable era in Corvette history? Because I certainly can't. These cars weren't bad because of poor engineering or lazy design. They were victims of circumstance caught in the crossfire of changing regulations and shifting priorities. But that doesn't make them any less disappointing to drive today. Number 3. The 2000 base C5. Now here's where things get interesting, because the C5 Corvette is generally considered a massive success. It brought the Corvette into the modern era with its hydroformed frame, a rear-mounted transaxle, and genuinely impressive performance numbers. So how did the base 2000 model end up on this list? Simple. It forgot what a Corvette was supposed to be. See, when Chevrolet designed the C5, they had a problem. The previous generation C4 had developed a reputation for being harsh and uncomfortable. Buyers complained about the rough ride, the road noise, the general sense that the car was trying to shake your fillings loose. So Chevrolet overcorrected. Badly. The base 2000 C5 was soft. Not just comfortable, but genuinely soft. The suspension was tuned for boulevard cruising rather than canyon carving. The steering felt like it was connected to the wheels through a thick layer of marshmallow. You could turn the wheel and wait, actually wait, for something to happen. Feedback? What feedback? The car communicated with its driver about as effectively as a teenager communicates with their parents. Automotive journalists were brutal. Magazine after magazine pointed out that the base C5 felt more like a Cadillac than a Corvette. And that wasn't a compliment. One publication actually suggested that buyers either spring for the Z51 performance package or just buy something else entirely. Imagine being told that a Corvette needs an upgrade package just to feel like a sports car. That's not a good look. The thing is, Chevrolet knew how to make the C5 handle. The Z51 package proved that. Stiffer springs, better shocks, improved steering calibration. Suddenly the car came alive. But the base model? It was content to waft down the highway like a luxury cruiser. Completely betraying the Corvette mission statement. Corvette buyers didn't want a grand tourer. They wanted a sports car. They wanted excitement, engagement, the feeling that they were piloting something special. The base 2000 C5 gave them none of that. It gave them comfort and refinement and absolutely zero reason to smile while driving. For a car wearing the Corvette badge, that's an unforgivable sin. The C5 would eventually redeem itself with the Z06 and later improvements. But that base 2000 model remains a cautionary tale about what happens when you prioritize the wrong things. Speaking of getting things wrong, we're about to meet the top 2 most hated Corvettes ever made. These aren't just disappointing. These earned genuine disdain from the community. Number 2. The pace car that became a punchline. Have you ever bought something because someone told you it would be worth a fortune someday? Maybe a limited edition sneaker, a commemorative coin, or some special release that was absolutely guaranteed to appreciate in value? Yeah, we've all been there. And in 1978, thousands of Corvette buyers fell for one of the automotive world's greatest collectability scams, the 1978 Corvette Indy 500 Pace Car Edition. On paper, it sounded incredible. Chevrolet was celebrating the Corvette's 25th anniversary, and what better way to mark the occasion than with a special pace car replica? Limited production, exclusive two-tone paint, special badging. This was going to be the investment of a lifetime, except it wasn't. Not even close. Here's what happened. Chevrolet announced they would produce 6,500 of these pace car replicas. That's it. Just 6,500 units for the entire country. Dealers immediately saw dollar signs. They started marking these things up like they were selling tickets to the moon. We're talking $10,000, $15,000, sometimes $20,000 over sticker price. Some dealers were asking $28,000 for a car that had a base price of around $13,000. That's more than double. For a Corvette that, let's be honest, wasn't mechanically different from any other '78 Corvette. People paid it. Speculators lined up. Investors who had never cared about cars suddenly wanted in on the action. They bought these pace cars, tucked them away in garages, and waited for the money to roll in. They're still waiting. For nearly 30 years, these so-called collectibles were worth less than what people paid for them. Imagine explaining to your spouse that the $28,000 investment you made in '78 is now worth maybe $15,000. That's not appreciation. That's depreciation with extra steps. And then there's the styling. The two-tone black and silver paint scheme with those dramatic decals looked exciting in 1978. It screamed speed and celebration. But here's the thing about trends. They don't age well. That same scheme now looks like the automotive equivalent of a disco ball. It's so aggressively 70s that you can practically hear the Bee Gees playing when you look at it. But wait, there's more disappointment. The same year brought us the Silver Anniversary Edition, which somehow managed to be even more underwhelming. Chevrolet celebrated 25 years of Corvette with a special silver gray exterior over a gray interior. Silver on gray for an anniversary. It's like throwing yourself a birthday party and serving plain oatmeal. The color combination was so dull, so uninspired, that it made the gaudy pace car look exciting by comparison. Both of these 1978 special editions represent something ugly in Corvette history. They were the first major collectability cash grabs, the first time Chevrolet and its dealers realized they could slap some special paint on a car, call it limited edition, and watch people throw money at it, regardless of actual value. The speculators who paid those astronomical dealer markups learned an expensive lesson about the difference between manufactured scarcity and genuine collectability. Sometimes limited edition just means limited sense. So let me ask you this. Have you ever fallen for a limited edition that didn't hold its value? Drop your stories in the comments. We've all got them. Now, speaking of regrettable Corvettes, we've finally arrived at the single most hated Corvette ever produced. Number 1, the Corvette everyone wishes never existed. And here we are, the most hated Corvette ever made, the 1982 Collector Edition. This is the car that combined everything wrong with late C3 Corvettes and then had the audacity to charge you extra for the privilege. Let's set the scene. By 1982, the C3 platform was 17 years old. 17 years. This thing debuted when Richard Nixon was president. The Vietnam War was still raging, bell-bottoms were cutting-edge fashion, and Chevrolet was still selling essentially the same car. But here's where it gets truly insulting. They called it the Collector Edition. Not because it was special, not because it offered anything revolutionary. They called it that because they knew the C4 was coming and figured they could squeeze a few extra $1,000 out of buyers desperate to own the last of a dying breed. The standard 1982 Corvette cost $18,290. The Collector Edition, $22,538. That's over $4,000 more. For what exactly? An opening rear window, special wheels, some unique trim pieces, and the same pathetic 200 horsepower Crossfire injection engine that couldn't outrun a family sedan. 200 horsepower in a $22,000 sports car in 1982. Think about that. The Porsche 928 was making 240 horsepower, the Ferrari 308 was pushing 250, and here's Chevrolet asking premium money for technology that was embarrassingly outdated. The worst part? The marketing worked. People actually paid extra for this thing, believing it would appreciate in value. Some did, eventually. Most just sat in garages as monuments to automotive cynicism. So, do you agree with our number 1 choice? Or does another Corvette deserve this dubious honor? Let us know in the comments. These 10 cars teach us something important about Corvette history. And there you have it, 10 Corvettes that made enthusiasts cringe, collectors hesitate, and Chevrolet executives probably lose sleep at night. But here's the thing about this list. When you look at all these cars together, you start seeing patterns. Emissions regulations strangling performance, terrible timing with economic downturns, marketing departments getting cynical with special editions that were special in name only, and quality control that sometimes felt like an afterthought. From the malaise-era disasters of the late 70s to those questionable pace car replicas and the Crossfire injection nightmare, each of these stumbles taught General Motors something valuable. The 1975 model's embarrassing power numbers eventually led to the fuel injection revolution. The early C4's quality problems pushed engineers to do better. Even the most hated Corvettes in history served a purpose, even if that purpose was showing Chevrolet exactly what not to do. And honestly, these low points make us appreciate the legendary Corvettes even more. You can't have the highs without the lows, right? Every Z06, every Grand Sport, every Stingray that made your heart race exists, partly because Chevrolet learned from these mistakes. Now I want to hear from you. Did we get it wrong? Is there a Corvette on this list you'd actually defend? Or maybe there's one we missed that deserves to be here? Drop your hottest Corvette takes in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. And stick around because next time we're flipping the script and counting down the greatest Corvettes ever made. Trust me, you won't want to miss that one.